Namaste. Welcome to another edition of Novimus podcast. So today we are going to read a very important book on the social history of India by Aravindan Neelakandan. So this is a very interesting book. I have gone few chapters. So we're going to start with the second chapter of the book, not the first chapter. That looks very interesting actually, in terms of a new discourse on social sciences. So how social sciences can be utilized to actually bring forward the Indic point of view. As of now, for last 200 years or more, now we have seen social sciences being done from the left perspective. Now, this book breaks the ground in terms of discussing the social sciences from the Indic wing perspective, not the right, but the Indic wing perspective. So we'll read the book in few minutes. Let me just first uh, give the details of how to get this book, where the book is available. I'll pin the link as well here. Here is it. Okay, let's go for which one we should go. Okay, let's take this one. Here we got the maximum discount. So let me get the link pinned. Here is the link, and here is the book. So, A Dharmic Social History of India, published by Blue One Ink, authored by Aravindan Neelakandan. So, this is available in good discount in Padega India. So, I gave this option. It gives you a good discount, and the rest you can see. And we will also read the book and see what the book talks about. Just in general, is for people if you want to support the Indic wing. If you want to support the author who want to write more books like this, please go ahead and buy the book. That aside, let's now we'll go towards reading the book. So before I read the book, let me just actually get the book in the because I have to read the physical book itself. So what I would need to do is I need to pin the book in the screen itself so that people know which book we am reading. So let me just get that done as well. It's almost there. So just give me a minute, not more than a minute, get everything done. And okay, fine. Okay. What we will do is, yes, this should be okay. Let me get this done. Okay, let's now go ahead with the reading itself. So the book is available on the screen for people who want to know which book I am reading. Let's see, reading शुरू करो. हाँ बिल्कुल दीदी, बस 2 मिनट. 22. Chapter 2: Need for a Hindu social sciences and a fresh view of Varna and Jati. The criticism and endorsements of Varna and Jati typically come from either Western or stagnant frameworks. However, what we really need is a fresh framework that is at the that is at once open to modern challenges and changes, consistent with the observations of the society, equipped with explanatory and transformational capacity for the society, and free from colonial perspective. Unfortunately, even those who consider themselves traditionalists often have a deep colonial perspective, which is deeply ingrained in their worldview and values. Furthermore, the present basis and framework of social science, are heavily influenced by colonial biases, even among those who are opposed to colonialism. This chapter aims to highlight the need and basis for developing social sciences called the Hindu social science, which can address these issues and provide a better framework for understanding society. Haldane Goyle diagnosis. Okay. John Burden Sanderson Haldane, 1892 to 1964, the British Indian scientist who was an evolutionary biologist, physiologist, biochemist, statistician, and a polymath. Oh, he must be a genius person. Let me read again. The British Indian the British Indian scientist was an evolutionary biologist, physiologist, biochemist, statistician, and polymath. He was one of the he was one of the architects of modern evolutionary theory. In 1917, Haldane came to India barely 25. His views were typically that of a British colonial military man. His observations of Hindu society were negative to the extreme. He wrote, "The key to India was snobbery. The key to India was snobbery. The Hindu caste system is the greatest glorification of snobbery that the world has ever known." He compared Hinduism unfavorably with Islam. Hindus are born, not made, and Islam is a religion of universal brotherhood, while Hinduism perpetuates a complex hierarchy of classes. Further, I am I am sufficiently prudish to find the human the I am sufficiently prudish to find the human sexual organs unsuitable as religious symbols. He is talking about Shivalinga. So that was the kind of propaganda, that was the kind of being spread. But as time went on, so this was the view of Sir John Burton Sanderson Haldane when he just came to India at 25 years old. This was his views. But as time went on, the inner world of Haldane began to evolve. In the decades to come, Haldane gained recognition as a scientist, being one of the chief architects of the synthesis between genetics and evolution. Additionally, he was a gifted popular science writer. His popular science articles were highly knowledgeable, taking the core science to the lay public. This required a deep understanding of both scientific concepts and society. Naturally, Haldane's views shifted from those of the typical British upper class to a more socialist one, eventually leading him to become a Marxist. So everybody becomes a Marxist, and at the end of the day, is that a conclusion that whoever you are, at the end of the day, you will become a Marxist? A good question. His observations of society became increasingly multidimensional. In 1942, he became a card-holding member of the Communist Party of Great Britain and the scientific face of the party. Namaskaram, Abhay. Then came the notorious Lysenko crisis. Under Stalin's patronage, Krofn Trofim Lysenko, 1898 to 1976, a plant breeder, castigated genetics as a bourgeois science. Ideological commissioner, ideological commissars agreed in chorus. Information started leaking. Information started leaking to the outside world that the geneticists were being persecuted in Stalin's USSR. Geneticists were arrested, asked to recant or jailed, tortured, and executed. Halden was torn between his commitment to party and science. Okay. He has put forth several allegations on Savarkar from receiving grants at public forum to carrying extensive correspondence. Ah, actually, we did one podcast on the same book, a review, a detailed review with with Dr. Kaushik Gangopadhyay. So yes, but I think Dada has read Dada is reading correct two books. One is Savarkar Darshan and other is a book by Dr. Janki Bakle. So let's see if it's possible. We try to address those points. We'll certainly try. Thank you, Harsh. Halden was torn between his commitment to party and science. Within party circles, he argued against what was happening in the USSR to the geneticists outside, including in the infamous BBC debate. He half-heartedly tried to justify what was happening in the USSR. This included this included the death of Nikolai Vailov, personally known to Halden. Halden was misled into thinking that Vailov had been released and died while working in the Arctic. He even stated so in the BBC debate and went on to extent of calling the brilliant scientist Vailov a plant breeder. However, the party was not pleased with his half-hearted defense. Finally, he had to serve severe ties with the party and denounced the USSR. By that time, the Soviet Union had gone to the extent of characterizing genetics as bourgeois science and even denied the existence of genes. Teaching genetics was henceforth banned. Sure. I'll try to get connected with Dada and see if we can both get together and do this. If time permitting, we'll certainly do that. One should not underestimate the power of Marxism, in particular, the left-wing worldview. In general, in general, had on a large number, okay, in general, had on a large number of scientists of that time. Okay. In general, okay. The power, okay. In particular, the left-wing worldview in general had on a large number of scientists of that time. How scientists become Marxist? uh, Audience and whoever is online, please share your thoughts on chat. How a scientist who believes in logic, in numbers, in arguments, in sound arguments, become Marxist? Like I don't really understand like how it happens. Halden was no exception. However, among most of the pro-Marxist scientists, Halden alone was ready to openly denounce the stance of the USSR. In, in a detailed study of his painfully fascinating phase in the history of genetics, Professor Diane B. Paul concludes thus: most of the party's scientific members ultimately left left it, but surprisingly, not over the Lysenko issue. As far as I have been able to determine, Halden alone broke with the party over Lysenkoism, choosing his scientific over his political loyalties. With with the aggravation of Cold War, Haldane became increasingly uncomfortable with living in England. He could not immigrate to Stalin's Russia either. During this time, he was also reading Hindu philosophical traditions and observing Hindu society. As a result, not only did his views on Hinduism and Hindu society change slowly, but he also started to see the importance of a Hindu framework of looking at society. This framework had been completely ignored by the colonial and Marxist frameworks and foundations of social sciences. In 1954, he was still convinced of the ultimate triumph of Marxism. But so, what is this virus of Marxism, which once somebody is infected, it's very difficult to actually remove from his psyche, from his psyche, from his mindset. In 1954, he was still convinced of the ultimate triumph of Marxism. After suffering so much at the hands of the Marxists of the USSR, still this brilliant individual believes in the ultimate type of Marxism. So you can understand how dangerous the virus of Marxism, of socialism is. But he would not underestimate But he would not underestimate the flexibility of Hindu Dharma, still categorizing Advaita as absolute idealism as opposed to scientific materialism, though. He considered the latter to be true. If I state my opinion to the officiating, if I state my opinion to the officiating Brahmin that Saraswati had no real existence, he will probably reply, "Of course not. Nor or I. All three of us are illusory forms. We can then proceed to discuss the nature of illusion. The fact that such an opinion is not only common but even orthodox implies that Hinduism will offer a different kind of resistance to okay, humanism humanism from other great religions. It may, of course, go down before a frontal it may, of course, go down before a frontal attack by Marxism, but it is so but it is but it is but it is so plastic and undogmatic that I believe that it may incorporate a great deal of humanism without succumbing. Read this line very carefully. But it is so plastic and undogmatic that I believe that it may incorporate a great deal of humanism without succumbing. He is talking about Hinduism incorporating, adopting the principles of humanism into the fold of Hinduism itself. So, and that we have seen, correct? The diversity of Hindu faith, the diversity of Sanatan Dharma, of Sanatan traditions, is not a one day affair. It has incorporated and also absorbed thousands of millions of traditions across the globe, not even in India and Southeast Asia or Japan. So we see a different kind of Sanatan Dharma being practiced every few kilometers. The traditions, the culture changes, but still the essence, the core essence remains of Sanatan Dharma. In 1958, he wrote a book, A Passage to India. I think many people would know about this book, A Passage to India. It's a very famous book. People, older people would know about this. A Passage to India. There's also a movie by Om Puri. If I remember correctly, there was a movie by where Om Puri acted, where this book was made into a movie, A Passage to India. A Passage to India, in which he adhered to an assimilanistic model of the caste system. He drew a parallel between the relationship between Spaniards and the Native Americans and the relationship between Brahmins and scheduled caste communities and tribes. Although it was still not correct, it was an improvement over his earlier observation that the caste system was the world's most snobbish system during the earlier part of his scientific career. A person born into one of the Hindu castes had a series of duties and rights. One born outside, one born outside them had fewer duties and also fewer rights. He was maltreated, but he was not persecuted in order to make him a Hindu. In fact, the descendants, in fact, the descendants of such people gradually became Hindus while preserving a good deal of their primitive religions and found themselves within the Hindu system as members of caste, so low as often to be untouchable by Hindu high caste. This may have this may have involved as much human suffering or more as the methods adopted by the Spaniards in Mexico or Peru. So he's comparing the kind of atrocities, the kind of bad behavior which Spaniards did to the Mexico or the Peruvian natives, and he is comparing the same to the bad behavior by the upper caste Hindus against lower caste Hindus. So this whole narrative of caste and atrocity is the only happened in Bharat, in India, is something which is not even their own writers have uh, supporting their own people. Forget about us. Where the conquered people were violently persecuted, but their descendants are now under little disadvantage compared to those of their conquerors. But it meant that the practice of killing a man for his opinion was foreign to Hinduism. A very important point. But it meant the practice of killing a man for his opinion was foreign to Hinduism. Then, when observing the events at a college founded by a Maharaja in India, he made the following observation. I reflected, I reflected that at Oxford, the college servants did not dine at the high table. Very important. Listen to it very carefully. I reflected that at Oxford, the college servants did not dine at the high table, nor do the tenants of the college estates, who provide it with the money rather than services. Nor did the servants at Manlian, Manlian College. Had they done so at Oxford, they and the fellows would have been equally embarrassed. True, the fellows would not have had to take formal bath. True, the fellows would not have to take formal bath after such an event. But until recently, the fellows of English colleges were the victims of an even more serious superstitions about untouchability. Untouchability in Oxford, Oxford, okay, enunciated by Saint Paul, namely that it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Even now, married fellows must pronunciate that that is to say, pass a certain number of nights per term in college without contact with their wives. The Indian government had made it a crime to exclude untouchable men and women from streets or temples. The British government regards bequests to religious foundations whose members must treat women as untouchable as charitable bequests. I regard the Indian government as more progressive in this respect than the British. Again, I will read it. The British government regards, regards bequest to religious foundations whose members must treat women as untouchables as a charitable bequest. I regard the Indian government as more progressive in this respect than the British. Okay. Yucatan caste wars, I think. Okay. In the given statement, Haldane made a thought-provoking observation about comparing not the old institutions of India with contemporary institutions of the West, but comparing the transformational process happening in India with the socially stagnant practices that might still exist in the West. Okay, but comparing the transformational process happening in India with the socially stagnant practices that might still exist in the West is the progressive one, hmm, where they still practice a kind of untouchability. What Haldane demonstrated in the above paragraph is that it is important to avoid the cardinal fallacy found in the worldviews and conceptions of many Stoics of humanities. This fallacy was described by Hindu thinker Sitaram Goel, an intellectual inclination to compare Hindu ideals and institutions from the past, not with their contemporaneous ideals and institutions in the West, but with what the West has achieved in its recent history, the 19th and 20th century. I'll read it again. An intellectual inclination to compare Hindu ideals and institutions from the past, not with their contemporaries' ideals and institutions in the West, but with what the West has achieved in its recent history, the 19th and 20th century. Thus, in Haldane's work, we see a clear propensity to move beyond the strong prejudice, colonial prejudice, and view Indian culture as an evolutionary context while making comparative observations. But most significant part of his observations of Indian system of knowledge and their application to the social sciences came when he gave the Huxley Memorial Lecture. This lecture, held in remembrance of the great evolutionist and comrade, of Charles Darwin, Thomas Huxley. Thomas Huxley is a relative of Aldous Huxley, who wrote the book Brave New World, was delivered by Haldane in 1956 at the Royal Society of Piccadilly on 29th November 1956. After pointing out that anthropologists also need to investigate animal cultures, he suggested that most anthropologists lack the necessary tools to study different human cultures without prejudice. He proposed an alternate approach. In my classification of human cultural features, I shall use a Hindu classification rather than a modern European or American one for the following reasons. Modern cultural anthropology is a byproduct of colonialism. It, please somebody give this to Kushal Mehra. Modern cultural anthropology is a byproduct of colonialism. It consists it consists of accounts given by persons almost all of European origin of the all almost okay by persons almost all of European origin of the behavior of members of other cultural groups over which they exerted dominance largely through the greater efficiency of their weapons. Colonialism lasted for about 4 centuries and is now drawing to a close. Hindu anthropology is similarly a byproduct of the caste system, which is now also drawing to a close, but which lasted for over 2000 years. Soviet anthropology is is a byproduct of yet a third system. We do not know how long it will last, but Soviet had a caste system. Hmm. We do not know how long it will last, but it is not yet 40 years old, and some of its tenets are taken over from Morgan's study of the Iroquois, which was a byproduct of colonialism. I shall therefore employ a terminology of respectable respectable antiquity in the form given given to it by my friend Professor Nirmal Kumar Bose in cultural anthropology. Somebody do search on Professor Nirmal Kumar Bose, who he was. Modern, yes, Didi. So, modern anthropology is helpful to us, but as he mentions, that if you're going to follow the frameworks and principles set by the modern anthropology, they are written from the white man's perspective. White man thought they are the only cultured superior race in this world because they had guns, they had Bible. So they went around the world in Africa, Asia, Australia, wherever they could go, in Europe, wherever they could go, and they would impose their own worldview on the other people. Yes, it can be. See, anthropology as a topic is good, but we have to actually first make sure that the framework is modern and contextual contextual, which takes into account a lot of parameters rather than basing the framework on the older ones. So you have to you have to re-sanitize the frameworks to make sure that the colonial aspect is not reflected in the current ones. So that is important because or else you are going to perpetuate the same thing again. Okay. This passage assumes importance for many reasons. Foremost, it initially ties what he calls Hindu anthropology to caste and then asserts that the caste system will eventually come to an end. However, there are aspects of Hindu anthropology that is more important than the caste system, which is merely a birth based social stratification. But that also is something which is being challenged. Okay. That is the author's view. It is it is these core aspects that have allowed Indian society. Okay, let me read again. It's important. Okay. There are aspects of Hindu anthropology that are more important than the caste system, which is merely a birth-based social stratification. It is these core aspects that have allowed Indian society not only to survive through millennia but also generate constant cultural innovations and evolution. So, what is this core aspect of Indian civilization? Hell then investigates this. Hell then investigates this through the work of Professor Nirmal Kumar Bose, 1909 to 72, a renowned Indian anthropologist of its time. In Bose's work, in Bose's work, Cultural Anthropology, 1929. I think we should read this book. Didi, you can read this book if you want. Maybe I should read it. Cultural Anthropology, 1929. So it should be available in archive. He identifies certain principles that are universal, that is across the diversity of cultural specifics. These principles can be found not only in human civilization but also primarily in non-human animal cultures. That is good. Halden presented an almost faithful reproduction of the above scheme in his lecture while pointing out that this is not only anthropological framework Hindu Dharma has. According to Hindu classics, human desires can be classified according as according as they are concerned with artha, economic economic needs, kama, reproductive needs, and moksha, the need for emancipation from these other needs. Perhaps there is also a dharma, also a dharma concerned with beauty, uh, sundara. A culture is characterized by various dharmas which satisfy these needs to a greater or less extent. Each dharma. So dharma here it means if I'm a student, so I need to do my student dharma of study. If I am an businessman, I need to do the dharma of being business. So business is becomes my dharma, doing the business in an ethical way. Each dharma acts through five agencies: vastu or material object, kriya or habitual action, samhati or social grouping, okay, vichara mulaka tattva, okay, vichara mulaka tattva, namely knowledge based on experience and subject to criticism, and vishwa mulaka tattva or knowledge based on faith, vishwas. So the word vishwas means you trust me, okay, or please trust me. आप आप हमें हम पे विश्वास करें. तो विश्व मूलक तत्व. These interact with swadharma of each individual, which to some extent corresponds to our notion of genotype. The critical point here is that Halden extends his classifications to all human cultures, irrespective of their variations. Anthropologists study all five of these agencies, and it is clear that the difference between them in different cultures are due mainly to different traditions rather than biological heredity. A human being brought up in one culture can adopt a tradition of another, though with some difficulty. Ram Ram. Then he went on to suggest that this might apply even to animals. Do social animals transmit vastu, material objects, from one generation to another? Most certainly. The most striking example is the transmission of females, queens of the agricultural ant genus Atta, Atta of species of the fungus Rosetus, which they cultivate. Okay, interesting. Okay, very interesting. Let me read it again. Do social animals like ants, okay, transmit vastu, material objects, from one generation to another? Most certainly. The most striking example is the transmission by females. It means female ants, queens keep a specific kind of material thing and let preserve it so that it can be used by the next queen. Okay, let's read it. Transmission by females, queens of the agricultural ant genus Atta, of pieces of fungus rosites which they cultivate. Do animals use material objects for communication? They do. So both they do. So both to communicate with each member of their species and with themselves in the future. As men use writing for both purpose, the kriya or habitual action is quite often learned. Kuo. 1938, experiments showed that the cats would not generally kill mice or rats unless they taught to do so by their parents. Some member of an animal species may invent a new kriya and it can spread apparently by imitation. A few years ago, a, s- a few years ago, a Stephen or a Watt among great Tits Paros Major invented the practice of opening left milk bottles left on human doorsteps. On the other hand, it is more doubtful that Samhati, a social organization, is traditional in animals. Vertebrates have to learn their functions in the society into which they are born. It would perhaps be rash to build too large a theoretical superstructure on this foundation. The question of a traditional tattva or knowledge in animals is difficult because we can only infer knowledge from habitual actions. Knowledge comes from habitual actions. Okay. Okay. For example, okay, Abhay says, for example, even Indian music, dancing, attire, saris and dhoti, fine arts, Gurukul system, etc., can evolve for the modern context instead of just replacing them with Western counterparts. That is what is happening, and that it should happen, and it has happened. So, what do you think? The Gurukul system, which was there before the British came, okay, or the before even the Islamic invaders came, they were same. No, they would evolve over time. If a system is running for thousands of years, of millennia and millennia, it cannot be a dogmatic static system. It would evolve over time. For the same reason, you had Vedas, after Vedas, you had Upanishads, you had Puranas. So why somebody would need to write Puran or Vedas or other Dharmashastras? Because it's a living society, living culture, and living culture, innovates and evolves over time with time and circumstances. From habitual actions, we do not know whether some kind of infantile learning in vertebrates are as difficult as are as difficultly effecable as moral and religious notions learned from mother are in some human beings. But this seems to be so in insects. It is not known whether human societies can exist without traditional Vishwa Mulaka Tattva, faith. Very important. Listen to me. But this seems to be insects. It is not known. It is not known whether human societies can exist without traditional mm, Vishwa Mulaka Tattva, means faith, Viswas. They can certainly exist with very different and mutually contradictory ones. And the knowledge acquired in this way need not to be include supernatural elements. Returning once more to Bose's classification, a few animals such as bowerbirds show uh, Sundara Dharma. Sundar means beautiful. Bowerbirds show Sundara Dharma, behavior satisfying aesthetic need. Have animals have animals do moksha dharma? So far, I know this question has not been asked. Is it too seldom asked? Is it too seldom asked concerning human cultures? I think it conceivably that some higher animals can perform moksha dharma in their post reproductive period, but there is no evidence for this for its cultural transmission. It might look strange. Okay, it is it is necessary to quote this lengthy passage because Halden shows the remarkable value of Hindu anthropology in studying other human and non-human cultures. What is even more important is that Halden did not take the Jati Varna taxonomy as universal or applicable in a universal manner, even transcending species barriers. Instead, he used an improvised framework of Purusharth, okay, Purusharth, yeah, framework of Purusharth, and showed that it could be used to create a foundation and a framework that could transcend even the species barriers, making it possible to study culture and society in its form and process. As mentioned earlier, Haldane's Hindu anthropological perspective was shaped by the cultural anthropology. I think we need to read this book, The Cultural Anthropology by Dr. Nirmal Kumar Bose. This looks very interesting. Who was a distinguished academic with a strong commitment to activism. Bose was actively involved in both freedom movement and Harijan upliftment initiated by Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi had launched this Gandhi had launched this movement to bring social justice to the highly discriminated against socially excluded communities, which were the scheduled communities. Bose worked Bose worked for their economic upliftment through the cottage industry and adult literacy program. He also participated in civil disobedience movement called Satyagraha and the Quit India movement. He was arrested on both occasions. During his time in prison, he was categorized as 3C class prisoner, which meant he was subject to poor prison conditions. Usually, political prisoners used to be categorized as A category. However, so all the Congress leaders were A category prisoners who got five-star treatment in jail. They got healthy and they were in much better shape when in jail than in outside jail due to British hospitality. However, usually political prisoners used to be categorized as A category. However, he never complained and used this opportunity to study society. It was only in 1934 that he met Gandhi for the first time during Gandhi's visit to Varda Sevagram. Here, Gandhi used to conduct a rigorous routine of spiritual practices even as he planned his strategies against the British. I have one very intriguing question which comes into my mind. Why Gandhiji was so insistent on non-ahimsa as a means to gain freedom? If you ever see the data that how people got freedom, how people were able to remove or force the colonial powers, whether it is British, France, Spaniards, or other Danes had some colonies in Africa, Southeast Asia. Every of those subjected people had to fight with weapons, with their own will. A physical fight was there where people were dying, unfortunately, on the both sides. The colonials who were trying to oppress them, and the oppressors who were trying to get themselves freedom. And there was a physical struggle going on, kind of violent struggle going on. How does Gandhi got this idea that I will discard every example how people will we got freedom, and I will adopt this innovative approach and ask every Indian to stand in front of the policemen and get beaten up and say, "Give me freedom." Look, I don't know how logically it sounds. Okay, were people dumb then or what? Do let me know. It was only in okay. Usually, political prisoners used to be categorized in a category. However, he never complained and used this opportunity to study society. It was only 1934 that he met Gandhi. Okay. He met Gandhi for the first time during Gandhi's visit to Varda Sevagram. Here, Gandhi used to conduct a rigorous routine of spiritual practices, even as he planned his strategies against the British. What? Get southern people to gather and let the the police beat them up and put them in jail. That was the strategy. Yeah, we're going to read that chapter as well, but not today because this is a very big book. If you can see the book, this is about 700 pages long. So that is on the third or fourth chapter. But to understand this book specifically, you need to read this chapter. So that's why I started with this chapter itself. Against the British. Both traveled with Gandhi during his visit to Noakhali. Okay. Gandhi used to conduct a routine of spiritual practices even as he planned his strategies against the British. Both traveled with Gandhi during his visit to Noakhali in East Bengal, now Bangladesh, where pogrom means genocide, if you do not understand, where pogrom, genocide against Hindus, was being concealed by both Muslim League and the British government. Both thus combined both academic rigor and rootedness in okay, where pogrom was Hindus against being concealed by Muslim League and British government. Both thus combined both academic rigor and rootedness in Indian socio-cultural reality. The framework that Bose, the framework that Bose brings out for studying the forte dimensions of any society from the Hindu worldview is as below. This is anthropological framework. We may start with a classification of human desires that can be roughly divided into three groups. Wise, those connected with artha, economic, okay, no, okay, this is a little bit different. Connected with artha or economic needs, kama or sexual desires, and moksha or the desire for spiritual freedom. What we customarily do or are trained to do in order to satisfy the above impulses can be called achar, achar, achar or institutionalized behavior. Interesting, the word institutionalized behavior or achar. So, like if you go to a temple, you know basically what needs to be done. Like you will not take your slippers inside the temples. You will leave your slippers outside the temple. And nobody has actually taught you this. Or you will get a tika or a tilak, and nobody has taught you to actually go and ask for a tilak. You will get it anyway. So these are called institutional behaviors which are acquired by being living in a group. From your parents, from your society, from your relatives, you will acquire these behaviors unconsciously, not being told. As we say, correct. School is not a learning place. School is something which the actual learning to live in a society happens in society itself. Schooling or formal learning is one aspect of learning, but not the whole aspect of it. A person who has not gone to a school can be as civilized as somebody who is a highly educated person. So learning and knowledge is something which is very different in so many ways. What we customarily do or are trained to do in order to satisfy the above impulses can be called achare or institutionalized behavior, which forms the core of social culture. Social culture itself may be called achar, if you remember that it acts in four phases, namely vastu, material object, kriya or habitual action, samhati or social organization, and tattva or abstract ideas, which may mainly consist of personal beliefs, opinions, uh, vishwa, visvasa mulaka, or of consistent beliefs and opinions, visvasa mulaka, or of consistent body of knowledge obtained through application of logical methods, vichara mulaka. Professor Both further points out how these principles can help us understand the structural and functional dimension of society and individuals at both macro and micro levels. As an example, he suggests that this framework can be used to explain the Vaishnava movement, which was significant during the Proto-Renaissance phase of Bengal and continues to exert its influence today. The cultural object of Vaishnavism is, however, the deliverance of individual from the bondage. However, is the deliverance of individual from the bondage of life, so that the trait can easily be placed under moksha or present scheme. It is therefore a trait belonging to the third category of our scheme operating through all the four possible phases of expression. But among the four, tattva probably predominates over the rest. He applies the same framework to understand the functional unit of family and states this. The family life of a man is intended to satisfy partly his sexual and partly his economic needs. Listen to me, listen very carefully. Family life of a man is intended to satisfy partly his sexual and, very important, partly his economic needs. In the pre-industrial age, family was an economic unit. It was not just blood relationships. Family meant family had an economic function in a society where it existed. It centers it centers around a home, a common object of property, and certain conventional beliefs regarding the relationship between members of the family. We can therefore look upon the family as something which satisfies the desires of artha, material, home, and kama, while it operates through the three phases of vastu, samhati, and tattva. The anthropologists acknowledge that this two-dimensional classification to studying human cultures may look clumsy. However, it is important because it emphasizes the connection of culture with basic, again read it. It emphasizes the connection of culture with basic human needs and desires. Culture is not disconnected from our human needs. They complement each other. They work with each other. And also indirectly helps to emphasize the basic unity which underlines all cultural phenomena. It is unfortunate that Indian academics have not followed this lead given by Haldane. Instead, he was sidelined and criticized for having Brahmical bias. Brahmical bias, which was not the case. Haldane had studied both colonial Western and Marxist anthropologies before arriving at the concept of Hindu anthropology. He had removed the caste he had removed the caste question from the Hindu social model as it was not considered center to it. Again, he had removed the caste question from the Hindu social model as it was not considered central to it. He showed that Hindu anthropology can be a viable model without can be a model without can be a viable model without jati and varna. In fact, Bose had studied. Just hold on, somebody is calling. I am back. Let me give me 30 seconds. Uh, somebody was, some people were calling me. Okay, it should be fine. Okay, let's continue reading. We have another 45 minutes to go. In fact, Bose had studied the impact of Jati Varna on what he considered the process of absorption of tribal communities into Hindu society. Again, very important statement. In fact, Bose had studied the impact of Jati Varna on what he considered the process of absorption of tribal communities into Hindu society. Like most academics of his time, he believed in like most academics in his time, he believed in the Aryan invasion migration theory. According to him, the Aryan Brahminical culture spread through the interiors of India, defeating and assimilating the tribal populations. In the Rig Veda, there is proof that the Aryans were surrounded on all sides by hostile tribes who were variously designated as Dasa or Dasyu. But in the age of Mahabharata, the term Dasyu lost its specific significance and was applied in general to such tribes as the okay Kirata, Yavana, Gandhara, China, Savara, Barbara, Pulinda, okay, Ranitha, and Cambodia. Thus, between the end of the Rigvedic period and that of the Mahabharata, many non-Aryan tribes had gradually become absorbed in the Brahminical society. The lower class in Brahminical society was formed by the Shudra. Conquered and subsequently assimilated tribes were usually assigned the status of Shudra in society. A mixed feeling of avoidance as well as of tolerance a mixed feeling of avoidance as well as of tolerance was thus exercised towards the Sudra. It had important social and economic consequences, and the structure of society and economic organization which grew up in ancient India, as uh, okay, as well as particular philosophical attitude which was current here, were all the outcome of this basic ambivalent attitude towards the conquered and subjected. Let me go through it. It had important social and economic consequences for Shudras and the structure of society and economic organization which grew up in ancient India, as well as a particular philosophical attitude which was current here, were all the outcome of this basic ambivalent attitude towards a conquered and subjugated people. We know now that the Aryan invasion theory, migration theory is now a figment of imagination. Okay. So, but still, the concept of assimilating different cultures, traditions into the overarching umbrella of Sanatana or Hindu faith does remain valid. It is important to remember that during Bose's time, the Aryan theory was the dominant paradigm in social sciences. As a result, Bose was influenced by it and derived his sociology from this colonial construct. This colonialism derived strand could be seen in many academics of the period, and it was rarely challenged. However, Indian seers such as Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo and Dr. Ambedkar challenged this framework. Okay, I did not know that the Aryan invasion theory was challenged by Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, and Dr. Ambedkar. Unfortunately, their works were not given much attention by the academics. Swami Vivekananda was perceived as a spiritual, patriotic monk. Dr. Ambedkar was seen as a leader of the scheduled caste communities and not much in sync with the freedom movement spearheaded by Gandhi. And Sri Aurobindo was once a radical revolutionary who had turned into a mystic seer. So their words on Aryan theory were not taken seriously. Maybe what we can do is we can compile their works and have a reading session one by one to actually see what they actually wrote in terms of invasion theory, Aryan invasion migration theory, and what was their rebuttals at that time. Because it's going to be very interesting reading. The influence of Mahatma Gandhi The influence of Mahatma Gandhi enabled Bose to view the social reality from a Indic perspective. Hence, she could never discount the spiritual element in the interaction of different communities through historical times. This model made Jati Varna, though a historically important process in the society formation of Hindus, not essential for the Hindu worldview. When contrasting the way the Hindu system and the Soviet system manage the ethno-cultural communal differences, Bose pointed out. Whereas the social scientists of the Soviet Union looks upon tribal religions and social cultures as so many unwanted survivals from the past, the Brahmin believed in the permanent necessity of many forms of cultures fitted into different stages of mental development. Thus, he was like thus he was like a pantheist in social idealism. But whether this Catholicity sprang from a genuine sense of human love or whether the priestly class fashioned it, fashioned it and fashioned it and stuck it, stuck to it in order to prevent the low caste from rising high in social scale, we cannot say accurately. At at this distance at this distance of time, the chances that both the motives operated in the society at the same time. Some idealists like Shankara, or in more recent times like Ramakrishna Paramhansa, seem to have desired the progress of all castes in mental development, while others surely wanted to keep them in their old place in order to pressure their aristocratic distinctions, in order to preserve their aristocratic distinctions. Status groups. He later elaborated on this aspect of Hindu integration of differences. One of the cultural ideas which thus ruled was that each culture is built around one core idea, and as no culture sees truth in its wholeness, that is, every community sees truth only in fragment. Again, read it. One of the central ideas which thus ruled was that each culture is built around one core idea, and no culture sees through sees truth in its wholeness. That is, every community sees truth only in fragment. The religion of a community should not be interfered the religion of a community should not be interfered with as long as its members allow the same right of freedom to others also to follow their own. Interesting argument. The religion of a community should not be interfered with as long as its members allow the same right of freedom to the others also to follow their own. Hindus do that. Hindus allow others or to actually practice their own faith until they interfere in our own, and which the colonialism did. Colonialism interfered in that. There was, however, a unifying factor. However, a unifying factor. This consisted this consisted of no more than the social practices prescribed by Brahminical priesthood, which sat very lightly on the multiplicity of practices prevalent among the constituent elements of Hindu society. This idea, this idea of about the multiplicity of fractional views of truth was a dominant element in Hindu religious thought. Even in the rigidity of caste, jati, both identified um, sannyasa, sannyas as an important emancipation pathway that allowed the complete self-actualization of the individual. The Hitopadesh, the Hitopadesh says that the individual has to be sacrificed for family. The Hitopadesh says, read again. The Hitopadesh says that the individual has to be sacrificed for family and the family for the village or for the country. Okay, let me read again and let me connect this to the libertarian principles as well. The Hitopadesh says that the individual has to be sacrificed for the family for the village for a country, but the whole world itself, but the whole world itself has to be sacrificed for the sake of the soul. I have learned one thing in my life, that if you are unable to sacrifice anything in life, you cannot achieve anything in life. Whether it is sacrificing your sleep, your time, your effort, or whatever you feel that is yours, the greater the amount of sacrifice means of what you think is valuable to you. And if you can, what is valuable to you, if you can sacrifice that for a greater cause, only then you can achieve something. But the whole world itself has to be sacrificed for the sake of the soul. Definite arrangements were definite arrangements were therefore made in India for the releasing of the individual from all forms of social obligation if he so desired, and stood actually stood in need of it. The price demand the price demanded the price demanded of the individual was indeed heavy. He had to surrender all the benefits normally derived from the collective life. He had to live upon the minimum clothes, have no roof over his head, and to be constantly on the move. He was to become God's beggar. And in order to enter into the sannyasa order, the individual had to perform the last rites of Shraddha of his own soul. Interesting. When Yogi Adityanath, the current chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, became a sadhu, became a sannyasi, he had to do his own Shraddha so that he could kill the individual who he was, and so that he can become a sannyasi. So there is a tradition in, if you want to become a sannyasi, you need to kill your own individual first, ego first. Only then you can become a sannyasi. So they do a ritual shraddh, and that is done by the sannyasi himself. The price demanded of the individual was indeed heavy. He had to surrender all the benefits normally derived from the collective life. He had to live upon minimal clothes, had no roof over his head, and to be constantly on the move. He was to become God's beggar, and in order to enter the sannyasi order, the sannyasa order, the individual had to perform the last rite of shraddha of his own soul. The sannyasi was put beyond the normal operation of social laws. He was no longer obliged to maintain the sacred fire, which which is the householder's first duty. Thus, although Hindu society suppressed the individual under normal conditions, yet the restrictions took a volunteer the restrictions took a volunteer character, as he could escape from the its rigorous from its rigors through the back door of institutions of sannyas. We may imagine that this safety valve was to some extent for the stabilizing the Hindu order of the society. Nirmal Kumar Bose's work, as highlighted by Haldane, reveals two aspects of Hindu anthropology. One is core, one is core, and the other is temporal. The temporal refers to social stratifications, while the core aspects of the spiritual understanding of diversity. This core aspect has always influenced and course this core aspect has always influenced and course corrected the temporal aspect. Very important. Understanding this process of Indian history can help us create a dynamic, decentralized framework to harmonize the cultural, religious, and ethnic differences globally. It can also help us improve the Jati Varna system by removing the negativities of social stagnation that have accumulated because of various historical and inherent factors. People who say annihilate Jati Varna, there is an alternate thought process from an anthropologist. This non-essentiality and non-centrality of Jati Varna to Indian concept of society, its evolutionary dynamics and values by JBS Haldane has been independently shown by Madhav Kada. Okay, that's we're going into a very instant territory. Has been independently shown by the Madhav Sadashiv Golwalkar or Guruji, uh, one of the co-founders of RSS. The second, the second All India leadership of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, when asked if the revival of Hindu Dharma would also mean the revival of uh, Varna Vyavastha, Golwalkar answered in the negative. The following is the question and answer he gave. Question: is it Varna Vyavastha not must for Hindu society? Answer: it is not. It is not an avastha. It is not an avastha or a condition of society. It is only a. It is not an avastha or condition of society. It is only a vyavastha, a system. You may keep it or reject it according reject it according as it serves the purpose or need. So if today the modern society needs Varna Vyavastha, we can keep it. If the modern society does not need it, remove it. Have something else, have something more improved upon it, upon things. Taking as a whole, the work of Nirmal Kumar Bose, one can consider creating a healthy framework for studying Hindu society the process and the process that run through it historically and geographically, culturally and psychologically. Taking as a whole the work of Nirmal Kumar Bose, one can consider creating a healthy framework for studying Hindu society and the processes that run through it historically, geographically, culturally, and psychologically. In the anthropological realm of Bose, there are dominant three strands. The first one is the first one the first one is the Aryan non-Aryan racial theory, which views history through the interaction between Aryans and non-Aryans and the Aryanization of the tribals. The second strand is the concept of priestcraft, which is the result of dominant discourse of Protestant components of colonial social sciences. The third and the most unique strand is the Hindu element, which is mediated by Gandhian influence. It emphasizes the unity, multiplicity, harmony, which emphasizes the multiplicity, harmony, and the institution of sannyasa. Both believe that even as the production system and the economic relations emanating from them move irreversibly in society, two critical components from ancient India should be at the heart of even the modern and emerging society. The democracy, the democracy of cultures and their federation under one system as as in the case of Hinduism, and secondly, the safety valve of sannyas through which the individual could seek his her way out when the authoritarian character of the social structure proved oppressive for him or her personally. Society and state even gave a person a respected place if one surrendered the economic advantage accruing from social conformity. Despite the mainstream academic emphasis on the so-called Sanskritization process alone, the supposed inequalities that were artificially mapped, the supposed inequalities that were artificially mapped over the process were given more importance. This process was seen as the Hinduization of tribals, who were then supposedly relegated to the bottom rungs of Hindu society, mostly providing cheap labor to the other section of the Hindu society. However, the exploitation of tribals as cheap labor was a phenomenon that emerged when the colonial British Raj and not with traditional Hindu society. We credit a lot of good things to the British when they came here, but they did thousand things which destroy the Hindu society and did more harm than what they are being given, what we are being taught. So again, the process of the Hinduization of the tribal, who were the supposedly relegated to the bottom rungs of the Hindu society, mostly providing cheap labor to other section of the Hindu society. However, the exploitation of tribals as cheap labor was a phenomenon that emerged from the colonial British Raj and not with traditional Hindu society. In fact, the tribals had more autonomy and egalitarian relations with non-forest dwelling communities. The Aryan non-Aryan binary and the so-called absorption of tribal communities later developed into Sanskritization by the famous sociologist M.N. Srinivas. Soon, in the dominant discourse, Soon the dominant discourse developed in India's premier social science institutions. Sanskritization was considered an unwanted process that led to the Hinduization of tribal and subaltern communities, who in turn were categorized as non-Brahmical, thus fed into the second component of the priestcraft. Almost all works subsequently focused on this aspect, as against this, the very ending components, the unique defining features of Hindu anthropology envisioned by J.B.S. Halden of Bose's anthropology, namely Purushastra, okay, the no, Purusharth, yeah, the word is Purusharth, namely Purusharth, unity in diversity or democratic harmonization of diversity and the role of agency, sannyasa, have not been studied in either historical or social context. The upcoming chapter are attempts to do this long overdue development of Bose's framework for the social sciences. This ends the chapter 2. We will read the chapter 3, the Harappan caste mystery, in the next session. So today, this is the ends the reading for today. And if you let's go through few questions. If we have any questions or comments. अरे दीदी मुझे क्यों नहीं आया आईटी सेल का यू आर सो लकी दीदी आपको मिल गया एटलीस्ट आईटी सेल गिव यू अ मैसेज let's see, we'll finish in about 5 minutes. We'll see any comments, if ask any comments or anything that I need to reply. Okay, this is already I had replied to. Yeah, ये काफी interesting. This book is very interesting actually. और मुझे we should read that book as well on the Hindu anthropology. No questions, just observing. Yes, lot of information. नई नई चीजें मिली है. Okay, so no questions and no comments. I think for me also it take time to actually absorb and reanalyze them again. But thank you everyone, and I will again encourage everybody to go ahead, read this book, purchase this book. किताब खरीदे, buy the book, read the book, okay? Because that is the only way. If you want these books to be written by the authors, then you have to support them, and support means reading the book, and also if you can gift these books to libraries, which I do. I purchase 4 or 5 copies of a book which I like, which needs to be read by many people. What I do is I gift these books to libraries whenever I have the chance, so that these books will again be read by multiple people. So if you can buy your own book, and if you can buy a few copies, find libraries where you can donate them, so that more people can read it. So thank you everybody for your patience, for listening to us, for your time. Thank you. Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram.